The dust had barely settled on the grave when Daniel Sterling mounted his horse and rode away from the only home he had ever known, leaving behind a father he could not save and a heart already breaking for a girl he had never met. It was late spring in 1878, and the Colorado Territory stretched before him like a promise written in stone and sky. Daniel was 22 years old, tall and lean from years of ranch work, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of weathered denim. His father had died of pneumonia 3 weeks earlier, and the ranch had been sold to pay debts Daniel had not known existed. Everything he owned now fit in his saddlebags, and the weight of starting over pressed against his chest like a physical thing. He rode south from Denver toward the San Juan Mountains, following stories he had heard about silver strikes and new towns springing up like wildflowers after rain. The mountains rose before him in jagged peaks still capped with snow, and the air grew thinner as he climbed higher into country that seemed untouched by human hands. Pine forests gave way to aspen groves, their white trunks gleaming in the afternoon sun, and Daniel felt something loosen in his chest as he put miles between himself and his grief. Colorado sat in a valley surrounded by mountains so steep they seemed to lean inward, as though protecting the town from the outside world. Daniel rode down the main street on a Tuesday afternoon in early June, taking in the mix of tents and wooden buildings, the ore wagons rumbling past, the miners with their worn clothes and hopeful eyes. It was a town being born, rough and unfinished, full of people chasing dreams or running from the past. He found work that same day at the livery stable, mucking stalls and tending horses for a man named Peterson who asked few questions and paid fair wages. The room above the stable was small and drafty, but it was his, and Daniel fell asleep that first night listening to the horses moving in their stalls below and feeling something like peace settle over him. 3 days later, he saw her for the first time. Daniel was leading a roan mare out to the paddock when a wagon rolled up to the stable, driven by a woman with copper-colored hair pulled back in a braid that fell past her shoulders. She wore a simple calico dress faded from washing, and when she jumped down from the wagon seat without waiting for help, Daniel saw that she moved with the easy confidence of someone who had been working hard all her life. She was young, perhaps his own age, with a scattering of freckles across her nose and eyes the startling green of new leaves. "I need to board 2 horses," she said, already unhitching the team from the wagon. "Just for the day while I conduct some business in town. Can you help me with that?" Daniel found his voice. "Yes, madam, we can do that." She glanced at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them that made Daniel forget what he had been about to say. Her eyes held intelligence and wariness in equal measure, and when she smiled it was slight and careful, as though she had learned not to give too much away. "I am Theresa Lawson," she said, extending a hand like a man would. "My father and I have a ranch about 8 miles north of here." Daniel shook her hand, feeling the calluses on her palm, the strength in her grip. "Daniel Sterling, I am pleased to meet you." They got the horses settled, and Daniel found himself talking more than he usually did, asking about her ranch, the mountains, the town. Theresa answered his questions with a directness he found refreshing, telling him about the 160 acres her father had claimed 3 years ago, the cattle they were slowly building up, the hard winters and the constant work. "It is just the 2 of us," she said as she paid him for the boarding. "My mother died when I was 14 back in Kansas. We came west looking for a fresh start." "I understand that," Daniel said quietly. "I lost my father a month ago. I came here looking for the same thing." Something shifted in her expression, a softening around her eyes. I am sorry for your loss. It is a hard thing losing a parent." They stood there in the stable doorway, horses nickering softly behind them, and Daniel felt the world narrow to just the two of them and the afternoon light slanting through the dust motes in the air. "I should go," Theresa said finally. "I have business to attend to." "Will you come back this way?" Daniel asked, then felt foolish for the eagerness in his voice. But Theresa smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "I will be back for my horses before sundown." She was true to her word. Daniel had the team hitched and ready when she returned, her arms full of parcels from the general store. She thanked him, counted out payment, and then hesitated with one foot on the wagon wheel. "There is a dance next Saturday night," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "At the church hall. The whole town turns out. You should come." "Will you be there?" Daniel asked. "I will." "Then I will be there too." He watched her drive away, the wagon wheels kicking up dust that turned gold in the late afternoon sun, and felt something wake up inside him that he had thought died with his father. The week passed slowly. Daniel worked his shifts at the stable, learned the rhythms of the town, and thought about Theresa Lawson more than was probably wise for a man who had only met her once. He borrowed a razor from Peterson and trimmed his beard, washed his good shirt, and tried not to think too hard about why he was nervous. Saturday evening arrived cool and clear, with the mountains purple against a darkening sky. Daniel walked to the church hall and heard fiddle music spilling out into the street before he even reached the door. Inside, the hall was packed with miners, ranchers, families, and working girls from the saloons, all mixing together in a way that only happened in these new towns where everyone was starting over. He spotted Theresa across the room, talking with an older man who had to be her father. She wore a dress of dark blue cotton, her hair loose around her shoulders, and Daniel felt his breath catch in his throat. She turned as though sensing his gaze and smiled when she saw him, excusing herself from her father and making her way through the crowd. "You came," she said, and there was genuine pleasure in her voice. "I said I would. Men say a lot of things they do not mean. I am not most men." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "No, I do not think you are. Would you like to dance?" Daniel had never been much of a dancer, but he took her hand and led her onto the floor anyway. The fiddle player struck up a lively reel, and soon they were spinning with the other couples, Theresa laughing when Daniel stumbled over his own feet, her hand warm in his. They danced 3 dances, then stepped outside for air. The night was cool and full of stars, the mountains dark shapes against the sky. They walked away from the hall, following the sound of the creek that ran through town. "Tell me about yourself," Theresa said as they walked. "Where are you from? What brought you to our Ray?" So Daniel told her. About growing up on the ranch outside Denver, about his father and the years of struggle, about coming home from town one winter day to find his father feverish and unable to breathe. About watching him die over 3 terrible days, helpless to do anything. About learning that the ranch was mortgaged beyond saving, that everything would have to be sold. "I had nothing left there," he said quietly. "So I came here. Figured I would start fresh, see what I could make of myself." Theresa was quiet for a moment, her face thoughtful in the starlight. "It takes courage to start over, to leave behind everything you know, or stupidity. I have not decided which yet." She laughed at that, a warm sound that made something in Daniel's chest tighten. "I think it is courage. Stupidity looks different." They found a fallen log near the creek and sat down, and Theresa told him her story. About growing up in Kansas, helping her mother with the house and the garden while her father worked other men's land. About her mother's death from cholera during the summer Theresa turned 14, how the world had gone dark and silent for months afterward. About her father's decision to head west, to claim land of their own under the Homestead Act. "We have a good piece of land," she said. "Water, grass, timber. But it is just the two of us, and there is always more work than hours in the day. We run about 50 head of cattle now, and we are building a real house to replace the cabin we have been living in." "It sounds like a good life," Daniel said. "It is, but it is lonely sometimes. There are not many people out our way, and winters are long." She glanced at him. "What about you? Do you plan to stay at the livery stable? For now, I am saving money learning the area. Eventually, I would like to have land of my own again, a ranch like my father had, like you have." "Land is everything out here," Theresa said softly. "It is freedom. It is a future. My father always says that a man who owns his land owns himself." "Or a woman," Daniel said. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and smiled. "Or a woman." They sat by the creek until the music from the dance hall faded and people began heading home. Daniel walked Theresa back to where her father was waiting with their wagon, and Jacob Lawson shook his hand with a grip that tested his strength. "You are the new man at Peterson's stable," Jacob said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir. My daughter speaks well of you." He glanced at Theresa, who had climbed into the wagon. "You should come out to our place sometime, share a meal with us. I could use help with some timber work if you have time. I will pay fair wages." Daniel felt Theresa's eyes on him and tried to keep his voice steady. "I would like that very much, sir." "Good. Come out next Sunday after church. Theresa will show you the way." Daniel watched them drive away, Jacob handling the reins while Theresa sat beside him, and felt hope bloom in his chest like a flower opening to the sun. The next week passed in a blur of work and anticipation. Sunday came bright and clear, and after a brief service at the church, Daniel followed Theresa's directions north out of town. The road climbed through pine forests and meadows thick with wildflowers, following a creek that tumbled down from the high country. The air smelled of sage and sun-warmed stone, and the mountains rose on all sides like ancient guardians. The Lawson Ranch sat in a wide valley carved by the creek, with mountains rising steeply on 3 sides and open grassland stretching to the south. Daniel could see why Jacob had claimed this land. There was water, timber, grass, and shelter all in one place. The cabin was small but solid, built of logs chinked with mud with a stone chimney and a shake roof. Nearby stood a half-finished house, larger and more ambitious, its frame already up and some of the walls complete. Theresa came out to meet him as he rode up, shading her eyes against the sun. She wore work clothes, trousers, and a man's shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and Daniel thought she had never looked more beautiful. "You found us," she said, smiling. "Your directions were good." Jacob appeared from behind the house, an axe over his shoulder. He was a tall man in his late 40s, weathered and strong with gray threading through his dark hair. His eyes were the same green as Theresa's, but harder, more cautious. "Sterling," he said with a nod. "Glad you came. I could use help raising the walls on the south side of the house." "Are you good with timber work?" "I know my way around an axe and a saw," Daniel said. They worked together through the afternoon, cutting and fitting logs, notching corners, raising walls. Jacob was a demanding taskmaster, but fair, and Daniel found himself matching the older man's pace, both of them working in the easy silence of men who understood physical labor. Theresa brought them water and helped where she could, and Daniel tried not to watch her too obviously. At sunset, Jacob declared the day's work done, and they ate supper at a rough table outside the cabin. Theresa had made venison stew and cornbread, and they ate while the mountains turned purple and gold around them. The conversation flowed easily, Jacob asking about Daniel's background, nodding approval at his ranching experience, asking thoughtful questions about his plans. "A man needs land," Jacob said as they finished eating. "Everything else is just working for someone else's dream. But getting land and keeping it are two different things. This country is hard. Winters will freeze you, summers will bake you, and there is always something trying to kill your cattle or burn your crops or flood you out. You have to be stubborn to make it here." "I am stubborn," Daniel said quietly. Jacob studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you are. You can come back next Sunday if you want. I will pay you $1 a day for your work." "I would rather help as a friend," Daniel said. "Save your money for materials." Something shifted in Jacob's expression, a slight softening. "That is a generous offer, but a man's work is worth something. How about 50 cents a day and Sunday supper? That sounds fair." The pattern established itself over the following weeks. Daniel worked 6 days at the livery stable, then spent Sundays at the Lawson ranch, helping Jacob with the house construction. The walls went up, the roof took shape, windows and doors were fitted into place. And slowly, carefully, Daniel and Theresa circled each other like two creatures learning they were not alone. They would walk by the creek in the evening after the work was done, talking about everything and nothing. Theresa told him about her dreams of expanding the ranch, about wanting to breed horses as well as cattle, about the books she had managed to save from Kansas and read over and over. Daniel told her about his mother who had died when he was 10, about the ranch he had grown up on, about the dream of building something that would last. "My father worked so hard," he said one evening as they sat by the creek, their boots off and feet in the cold water. "Every day of his life from sunup to sundown, and in the end he had nothing to show for it but debts and a grave. I want to do better than that. I want to build something that matters." "You will," Theresa said with quiet certainty. "I can see it in you. You have the will for it. So do you." She smiled. "We are alike in that way, I think. We know what we want and we are willing to work for it." "What do you want, Theresa?" She was quiet for a moment, watching the water flow over the rocks. "I want the ranch to succeed. I want to take care of my father, and I want—" She hesitated, then looked at him directly. "I want someone to share it with, someone who understands the work and the land and does not see me as just a woman who should be kept in the kitchen." Daniel's heart was pounding. "I see you as someone remarkable, strong and smart and beautiful. Someone I would be honored to stand beside." Theresa's breath caught. "Daniel, I know it is fast," he said quickly. "I know we have only known each other a few months, but I feel something when I am with you, something I have never felt before. Like I have been asleep my whole life and I am finally waking up." "I feel it too," she said softly. "It frightens me sometimes how much I feel it." Daniel reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I am not good with fancy words, but I care about you, Theresa. More than I thought I could care about anyone, and I would like to see where this goes between us if you are willing." She squeezed his hand. "I am willing, more than willing." They sat there as the light faded and the first stars appeared, hands clasped, the sound of the creek a constant song around them. When they finally walked back to the cabin, Jacob was sitting on the porch, smoking his pipe. He looked at their joined hands and nodded once, and Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Summer deepened into autumn, the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides, the air taking on a crystalline quality that made everything seem sharp and bright. The house was nearly finished now, and Daniel found himself spending more time at the ranch, sometimes staying overnight in the old cabin when the work ran late. Jacob treated him like family, and Theresa grew more relaxed around him, laughing more easily, touching his arm when they talked, letting her guard down in ways that made Daniel's heart soar. One Saturday afternoon, in late September, Daniel rode out to the ranch unannounced. He had been thinking about something for days, an idea that had taken root and would not let go. He found Theresa in the pasture, working with a young horse on a lead rope, teaching it to respond to verbal commands. She looked up when she heard his approach and waved, her face bright with pleasure. "This is a surprise," she said as he dismounted. "I thought you worked Saturdays. Peterson gave me the afternoon off. I wanted to see you." Something in his tone made her stop what she was doing and give him her full attention. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong, I just—" He took a breath. "Will you come for a ride with me? There is something I want to show you." Curiosity flickered in her eyes. "All right. Let me get this horse settled." They rode north from the ranch, climbing higher into the mountains along a trail that switchbacked through pine forest. Daniel had explored this area on his own over the past weeks, ranging farther each time, learning the land. He led Theresa up the mountain for nearly an hour, until they emerged onto a broad plateau covered in grass and scattered with wildflowers despite the lateness of the season. The view was breathtaking. They could see our Ray in the valley below, the Lawson Ranch to the north, and mountains stretching in every direction like waves on a frozen ocean. A creek ran along one edge of the plateau, disappearing into a grove of aspens that shimmered gold in the afternoon light. "This is beautiful," Theresa breathed. "I have never been up this high." "There is more," Daniel said. He led her to the aspen grove where an enormous oak tree stood alone among the white-barked aspens, a solitary giant that should not have been growing at this elevation but somehow was. Its trunk was as wide as 3 men standing shoulder to shoulder, its branches spreading out like arms embracing the sky. "An oak tree," Theresa said wonderingly. "How is that possible up here?" "I do not know, but I like to think it is a survivor. Something that should not exist but refuses to give up." He dismounted and helped Theresa down, then pulled a knife from his belt. The blade was sharp and clean, the handle worn smooth from use. It had been his father's, one of the few things Daniel had kept. "I want to show you something," he said quietly. "And I want you to know that I mean it with my whole heart." He turned to the oak tree and began to carve, working carefully, the blade biting into the bark. Theresa watched in silence as he worked, and when he stepped back, she could see what he had carved. Theresa Lawson below that. He added, "Daniel Sterling 1878," and beneath it all, enclosed in a heart. Forever Theresa's hand came up to cover her mouth, her eyes bright with tears. "Daniel, I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you since the first day I saw you at the livery stable. I know I do not have much. I do not have land or a house or anything to offer you except my 2 hands and my heart. But they are yours if you want them. All of it is yours." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. "Of course I want them. I love you too. I have loved you for months, but I was afraid to say it, afraid you would think I was being foolish or forward." Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "There is nothing foolish about it. This is the realest thing I have ever felt." They stood there beneath the oak tree, wrapped in each other's arms, while the wind whispered through the aspens and the sun painted the world gold. When they finally pulled apart, Theresa reached up and touched the carving gently, tracing the letters of her name. "Will it stay?" she asked. "Will the tree grow over it?" "No," Daniel said. "It will grow with the tree. As the tree grows, the carving will expand, get bigger. It will be here for as long as the tree stands. Then it will be here forever," Theresa said softly. "Because this tree looks like it has been here since the world began, and it will be here long after we are gone. I hope so. I want something to mark this moment, to prove that we were here, that we loved each other." Theresa turned back to him and took his face in her hands. "I do not need proof. I will remember this moment for the rest of my life." Then she kissed him, slow and sweet, and Daniel felt the world fall away until there was nothing but her, the taste of her lips, the warmth of her body against his. They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, hands occasionally reaching across the distance between their horses to touch, to reassure, to connect. Jacob was sitting on the porch of the new house, which was finished enough now that they had moved in, and he stood when he saw their faces. "Something has happened," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir," Daniel said, dismounting. "I have told your daughter that I love her, and she has said she loves me too. I know I should have asked your permission first, but the moment came upon me and I could not hold it back." Jacob looked at Theresa, who had also dismounted and was standing beside Daniel, her hand in his. "Is this what you want, daughter?" "It is, Papa, more than anything." Jacob was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between them. Finally he nodded. "You are both adults. You are old enough to know your own minds, and I have been watching you, Sterling. You are a good man. Honest, hard-working, decent. You treat my daughter with respect. That is all I can ask for." He paused. "But what are your intentions? Marriage?" "Yes, sir," Daniel said without hesitation. "If Theresa will have me, then you have my blessing. Both of you." Theresa let out a breath she had been holding and ran to hug her father. Jacob held her tight, and Daniel saw the sheen of tears in the older man's eyes. When they finally pulled apart, Jacob cleared his throat. "We should have a proper celebration. But first, Sterling, there is something I want to show you." He led them around to the north side of the property, where a small valley opened up, invisible from the main ranch. It held perhaps 40 acres of good grassland, with a spring bubbling up from the rocks and another creek running down from the high country. "This land was not part of my original claim," Jacob said, "but I filed on it last month, added it to my homestead. I have been thinking about what to do with it, and I have decided. If you and Theresa marry, this land is yours. You can build a house here, run your own cattle. It is enough to start with, and you will be close by so we can help each other." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "Sir, that is too generous." "It is practical," Jacob said gruffly. "You will be family. And Theresa is right that this place needs more hands. With you here we can expand, do more. It benefits all of us." "I will work hard to earn it," Daniel said. "I promise you that. I know you will. That is why I am offering it." They stood there as darkness fell, the three of them, looking out over land that would soon be Daniel's, and Daniel felt something settle into place inside him. He had lost everything, had come west with nothing but grief and determination, and now he had found more than he had ever dreamed possible. Land, family, purpose, and most of all, love. The wedding was held on a cold November morning at the church in Auray, with half the town in attendance. Theresa wore a dress of cream-colored wool that one of the town women had helped her sew, and Daniel wore his father's good suit, taken in at the shoulders and waist to fit him. The minister kept the service short, and when Daniel kissed his bride, the church erupted in cheers and applause. They held the reception at the church hall, with fiddle music and dancing and a meal that everyone contributed to. Peterson gave them a set of copper pots as a wedding gift, and several of the miners presented them with a handmade bed frame. Jacob's gift was the deed to the 40 acres, officially signed over to Daniel Sterling, and when Daniel saw it, he had to walk outside to compose himself, overwhelmed by the generosity and the trust it represented. That night they went to their new home, a small cabin Daniel had built on the 40 acres over the past month, working every spare moment he had. It was rough and simple, just one room with a stone fireplace, but it was theirs. Their first night as husband and wife was tender and nervous and full of laughter. Two young people learning each other, claiming each other, building the foundation of a life together. Winter came hard that year, with snow falling from November through April and temperatures dropping so low that water froze in the bucket overnight. But the cabin stayed warm, and Daniel and Theresa stayed busy. They spent their days working on the ranch, caring for the cattle, feeding the horses, cutting firewood. In the evenings they would sit by the fire, Theresa sewing or reading while Daniel carved small figures from wood or repaired tack, and talk about their plans for the spring. "I want to get 20 more head of cattle," Daniel said one night in January, the wind howling outside and snow piling against the walls. "We can run them with your father's herd, share the work." "And I want to start breeding horses," Theresa said. "There is always demand for good horses, and I have a talent for working with them." "You have a talent for everything you set your mind to." She looked up from her sewing and smiled. Flatterer, truth-teller. They were happy in a way that Daniel had never imagined possible. The work was hard and the winters were long, but they had each other, and that made everything bearable. In the spring, when the snow finally melted and the meadows exploded with wildflowers, they found out that Theresa was pregnant. Daniel remembered the moment she told him. They had been working in the garden behind the cabin, turning over the soil for planting, when Theresa suddenly stood up and pressed her hand to her stomach with a strange expression on her face. "What is it?" Daniel asked, immediately concerned. "Are you all right?" "I am fine. Better than fine." She looked at him with wonder in her eyes. "Daniel, I think I am going to have a baby." He stared at her, the words not quite making sense. "A baby?" "Yes. I have missed my monthly courses twice now, and this morning I felt sick. I am almost certain." Daniel dropped the hoe he was holding and crossed to her in 3 long strides, pulling her into his arms. "A baby," he said again, this time with awe. "We are going to have a baby." Theresa was laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy?" "Happy." "I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once." "Yes, I am happy." "Theresa, I am so happy I could shout." "Then shout." So he did, throwing his head back and letting out a whoop that echoed off the mountains, and Theresa laughed until she had to sit down, holding her stomach. Jacob was thrilled when they told him the news and immediately began planning additions to their cabin. "You will need more room," he said. "A child needs space to grow. We can add another room on the south side, big enough for a bedroom." They worked on the addition through the summer. Daniel and Jacob and sometimes Theresa, though Daniel insisted she not do anything too strenuous. The baby was due in December, and as the months passed and Theresa's belly grew round, Daniel found himself consumed with both excitement and worry. Childbirth was dangerous, especially out here far from doctors, and he lay awake at night with his hand on Theresa's stomach, feeling the baby kick, praying that everything would be all right. The baby came early, on a snowy night in late November. Daniel rode through a blizzard to fetch the midwife from town, his horse struggling through drifts, his hands numb on the reins. By the time they made it back to the cabin, Theresa was deep in labor, her father sitting beside her and looking more frightened than Daniel had ever seen him. The birth was long and difficult. Theresa labored through the night and into the next day, and Daniel paced outside in the snow, unable to stay still, unable to think about anything except the sounds coming from inside the cabin. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, he heard a baby's cry, thin and angry and absolutely beautiful. The midwife opened the door. "You have a son," she said, smiling, "and your wife is tired but well." Daniel pushed past her and into the cabin, where Theresa lay propped up on pillows, pale and exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket, and when Daniel approached, she pulled the blanket back to reveal a red-faced baby with a shocking amount of dark hair. "Our son," she said softly. "Daniel, meet your son." Daniel sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at the baby, this impossibly small person that he and Theresa had created, and felt tears running down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Theresa, he is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Theresa asked. Daniel thought for a moment. "Thomas, after my mother's father, Thomas Jacob Sterling." "Thomas," Theresa repeated, testing the name. "Yes, I like that. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world." They spent the winter wrapped in the cocoon of new parenthood, learning how to care for a baby, taking turns walking him when he cried at night, marveling at every tiny change. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. Jacob was besotted with his grandson and spent hours at their cabin, rocking the baby and telling him stories about his mother when she was small. Spring came again, and with it a return to the rhythms of ranch life. Theresa carried Thomas in a sling while she worked in the garden, and Daniel built a cradle that they could move from room to room so the baby was always nearby. They were exhausted and happy, building their life one day at a time. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered, the cattle herd grew, and Theresa's horse breeding operation became known throughout the valley. Daniel and Jacob worked as partners, their combined land and labor making both families stronger. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to ride almost before he could walk, falling in love with the land and the animals and the mountains that surrounded them. When Thomas was 3, Theresa became pregnant again, and this time the baby came easier. A daughter, born on a warm June morning with red hair like her mother and her father's serious expression. They named her Alina, and she grew up fierce and independent, running wild with her brother through the meadows and creeks of the ranch. More years passed. Jacob grew older but remained strong, still putting in a full day's work well into his 60s. Daniel and Theresa's ranch expanded, their herd growing to over 200 head, their horse breeding operation producing some of the finest mounts in Colorado. Thomas and Alina grew into capable, confident young people who loved the land as much as their parents did. But through all of it, through the good years and the hard winters, through calving seasons and roundups and long summer days, Daniel never forgot the oak tree on the plateau. He went up there sometimes, usually alone, riding the same trail he and Theresa had followed that September afternoon so long ago. The carving had indeed grown with the tree, just as he had predicted, the letters larger now but still clear, still readable. Sometimes he would trace the letters with his finger and remember that day, the way Theresa had looked with tears streaming down her face, the way his heart had felt like it might burst. He never told Theresa about his visits. He was not sure why. Perhaps because the oak tree felt like a secret, a promise he had made to himself as much as to her. Or perhaps because he was waiting for the right moment to take her back there, to show her how the carving had grown, how their love had been marked permanently into the wood. But years slipped by, and there was always work to be done, always some crisis or celebration or ordinary day that demanded attention. Thomas grew up and married a rancher's daughter from the next valley over, and they built a house on the northern edge of Daniel and Theresa's land. Alina surprised everyone by announcing at 20 that she was going to Denver to study at a teacher's college. And though it broke Theresa's heart a little to see her daughter leave, they supported her decision. Jacob died peacefully in his sleep one winter night when he was 68 years old, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had carved from the wilderness. Daniel and Theresa stood at his grave with their arms around each other, older now, gray threading through their hair, their hands rough from a lifetime of work, and mourned the man who had given them so much. Time moved on. The railroad came through our array, and the town grew from a rough mining camp into a proper city. The wild edge of the frontier began to soften, and new settlers arrived every month, claiming land and building homes. Daniel and Theresa watched it all from their ranch, anchored to the land they loved, content with the life they had built. It was Alina who brought up the oak tree. She had come home for Christmas in 1903, taking a break from her teaching position in a small school outside Denver. She was 28 now, confident and independent, with her mother's red hair and her father's determination. On Christmas Eve, after the dinner dishes had been cleared and Thomas and his wife had gone home with their 3 children, Alina sat by the fire with her parents and said, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" Theresa asked, knitting a blanket for her newest grandchild. "When I was little, maybe 6 or 7, I remember you and Papa talking about an oak tree. You said Papa had carved something into it, something special, but that you had not been back to see it in years. Do you remember?" Daniel and Theresa exchanged glances. "I remember," Daniel said quietly. "Is it still there, the carving?" "I imagine so. Oak trees live for hundreds of years." "I would like to see it," Alina said. "And I think Mama should see it too. Have you been back there, Mama?" Theresa shook her head slowly. "No, not since that first day 25 years ago." She looked at Daniel. "I had forgotten about it, if I am honest. So much has happened since then." "Too much," Daniel agreed. "Life gets busy." "Then we should go," Alina said firmly. "Tomorrow on Christmas Day. It would be a lovely way to spend the afternoon, and the weather is supposed to be clear." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest, a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. "Are you sure you want to ride all the way up there? It is a long way and the trail can be treacherous in winter." "I am sure," Alina said. "And Mama is one of the best riders I know. She can handle it." Theresa was already nodding. "Alina is right. We should go. I want to see it again. I want to see what has become of that carving you made all those years ago." So on Christmas Day in 1903, the 3 of them rode up the mountain. It took longer than Daniel remembered, the trail steeper and more winding than it had seemed when he was young. But they climbed steadily, bundled in heavy coats and scarves, their horses picking their way carefully through patches of snow. When they finally emerged onto the plateau, Theresa gasped. "It is just as beautiful as I remember. More beautiful, even." The mountains stretched out around them, white with snow, the sky a brilliant blue. The creek was partially frozen, and the aspens stood bare, branched and ghostly against the winter landscape. And there, in the center of the aspen grove, stood the oak tree. It was larger than Daniel remembered, more massive, its bare branches reaching toward the sky like a cathedral. They dismounted and walked toward it, Alina slightly ahead, Theresa and Daniel hand in hand. "Where is the carving?" Alina asked, circling the tree. "North side," Daniel said. "About eye level, or at least it used to be." They found it, and Theresa stopped dead when she saw it. The carving had indeed grown with the tree, the letters now 3 times the size they had been, stretched and widened by decades of growth. But they were still clear, still readable. Theresa Lawson, Daniel Sterling, 1878. Forever. The heart that enclosed it all was enormous now, the size of a dinner plate, the lines deep and permanent in the bark. Theresa reached out and touched it with shaking fingers, tears streaming down her face. "Daniel," she whispered. "Oh, Daniel. I told you it would last," he said, his own voice rough with emotion. "I told you it would be here as long as the tree stands. I never doubted you, but seeing it now, seeing how it has grown." She turned to him. "This is us, this tree. We were young and small then, just starting out, and look at us now. Look at what we have grown into." Daniel pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I have loved you every day since the moment I met you. Every single day, Theresa, and I will love you every day I have left." "I know," she said. "I have always known." Eleanor was crying too, standing a little apart to give them privacy. "It is the most romantic thing I have ever seen," she said. "Papa, you old softy," Daniel laughed, his eyes wet. "I was young once, believe it or not." "You are still young," Theresa said fiercely. "We both are. We have years left, Daniel. Years and years." They stood there beneath the oak tree as the afternoon light slanted through the branches, 3 generations of love and life and stubborn determination. Daniel thought about the young man he had been, riding into our array with nothing but grief and hope. He thought about seeing Theresa for the first time, about the way his heart had known instantly that she was the one. He thought about all the years since, the work and the struggle and the joy. "We should come back here every year," Theresa said. "Every Christmas, if we can, to remember this moment, to see how the carving grows." "I would like that," Daniel said, and they did. For the next 10 years, weather permitting, they made the ride up to the plateau on Christmas Day. Sometimes it was just the two of them. Sometimes Eleanor or Thomas came along. Sometimes the grandchildren. But Daniel and Theresa always made the trip, always stood beneath the oak tree and looked at the carving that had become a living testament to their love. The years continued to pass. Daniel's hair went fully gray, then white. Theresa developed arthritis in her hands but refused to slow down. They watched their grandchildren grow up, celebrated Thomas and his wife's silver wedding anniversary, welcomed Eleanor's husband when she finally married at 35, a banker from Denver who gave up city life to run a ranch with his formidable wife. In 1915, on a warm summer evening, Daniel and Theresa sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the mountains. They were both 74 years old, married for 37 years, and the ranch stretched around them like a kingdom they had built with their own hands. "Do you remember that first day at the livery stable?" Theresa asked, her hand in his. "Every detail," Daniel said. "The way you jumped down from the wagon, the way you looked at me like you were measuring whether I could be trusted, the freckles on your nose." She laughed. "I was measuring you. And I decided you could be trusted. Best decision you ever made." "Second best," she corrected. "The best decision was saying yes when you asked me to ride up to see that oak tree. I was terrified you would say no. I could never have said no to you. Not then, not ever." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from the sky. Inside the house, they could hear Eleanor and her husband preparing dinner, their voices a pleasant murmur. In the distance, cattle lowed in the evening air and somewhere a horse whinnied. "We have had a good life," Daniel said quietly. "The best life," Theresa agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was a girl back in Kansas, better than I deserved." "You deserve everything good in the world." She squeezed his hand. "I got it, I got you." Daniel felt his eyes grow wet, something that happened more and more as he got older. "I love you, Theresa Sterling. I have loved you from the first moment I saw you, and I will love you beyond my last breath. And I love you, Daniel Sterling. You are my heart. You have always been my heart." The sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and they sat together in the gathering darkness. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last far beyond their own lives. Years continued their steady march. Daniel and Theresa grew older, more fragile, but they remained on the ranch, refusing to leave the land they loved. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them with love and care, and the ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management. On a clear December morning in 1918, Daniel woke to find Theresa unusually quiet. She was sitting by the window, wrapped in a quilt, looking out at the mountains. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, moving to sit beside her. "I want to go to the oak tree," she said. "One more time." "Can we do that?" Daniel felt a chill run through him. "It is the middle of winter. The trail will be dangerous." "I do not care. I want to see it, Daniel. I need to see it." Something in her voice made him agree. They told Thomas and Elena their plan, and both their children objected strenuously, but Theresa was immovable. So they bundled up warmly, mounted their horses with help from Thomas, and rode up the mountain trail one last time. The ride was slow and difficult. Both of them were old now, their bodies stiff and tired, and the cold bit through even their heavy coats. But they pressed on, Theresa leading the way with the same determination she had shown all her life. When they reached the plateau, they found it covered in fresh snow, pristine and beautiful. The oak tree stood like a sentinel, its branches heavy with snow, and they made their way to it slowly. The carving was enormous now. The letters stretched to 3 feet tall, the heart surrounding them even larger. Time and growth had distorted the shape slightly, but it was still readable, still clear. Theresa reached out and laid her palm against it, and Daniel saw tears freezing on her cheeks. "It is still here," she whispered. "After all these years, it is still here." "Just like us," Daniel said, putting his arm around her. "Promise me something," Theresa said, turning to look at him. Her green eyes were as bright as ever, undimmed by age. "Promise me that you will tell our grandchildren about this tree, about what it means. About how love, real love, leaves a mark on the world that nothing can erase." "I promise," Daniel said, his throat tight. "And promise me that no matter what happens, you will remember that I loved you. Every day, every moment. You were the best thing that ever happened to me." "Theresa, what are you saying?" But she just smiled and kissed him gently. "I am saying that I am grateful for all of it, for every moment we have had together." They rode back down the mountain as the sun was setting, both of them quiet, hands occasionally reaching across to touch, to connect. That night, Theresa went to sleep in Daniel's arms, and she did not wake up. The grief was like a physical blow, knocking Daniel off his feet, making it hard to breathe. He had known, intellectually, that one of them would have to go first, but he had not been prepared for the reality of waking up without her, of facing each day knowing she was gone. They buried her on the hill beside her father, with the mountains rising around them and the ranch spreading out below. The whole community came to pay their respects, 3 generations of people whose lives Theresa had touched. Elena and Thomas spoke about their mother, about her strength and her kindness, and her fierce love of the land. And Daniel stood at the grave with tears streaming down his face, thinking about a young woman jumping down from a wagon at a livery stable, about freckles on her nose and eyes like new leaves. The months after Theresa's death were the hardest of Daniel's life. He felt hollowed out, a shell of himself, going through the motions of living because his children needed him to. Elena moved back to the ranch temporarily, taking a leave from her teaching, and she sat with him in the evenings, letting him talk about her mother, letting him grieve. "She loved you so much," Elena said one night. "I hope you know that. She told me once that meeting you was like finding the missing piece of herself." "She was my missing piece too," Daniel said. "I do not know how to be whole without her." "You do not have to be whole. You just have to keep going one day at a time. That is what she would want." So Daniel kept going. He worked when he had the strength, spent time with his grandchildren, helped Thomas with the ranch management. And once a month, he rode up to the plateau, to the oak tree, and sat beneath it, talking to Theresa as though she could hear him. "I miss you," he said on one of those visits, his hand pressed against the carving of her name. "Every moment of every day I miss you. But I am trying to keep going like you would want. The ranch is doing well. Thomas has expanded the herd again, and Elena's son is showing real talent with the horses, just like you did. "They are good kids, Theresa. We raised them well." The wind whispered through the bare branches, and for a moment, Daniel could almost imagine it was Theresa answering him. Years passed. Daniel grew older, more frail, but he refused to leave the ranch. He spent his days sitting on the porch, watching the mountains, remembering. His grandchildren would visit and sit with him, and he would tell them stories about their grandmother, about the early days of the ranch, about a life lived fully and well. One afternoon in early summer 1925, Eleanor came to visit with her oldest son, Marcus, who was 15 and tall like his grandfather. They sat on the porch, drinking lemonade and watching the cattle graze in the distance. "Grandpa," Marcus said after a while, "will you tell me about the oak tree?" Grandma Eleanor mentioned it, but she said you should be the one to tell the story. Daniel looked at his grandson, this boy on the edge of manhood, and nodded slowly. "Yes, I think it is time." So he told the story. About meeting Theresa at the livery stable, about falling in love, about the day he carved her name into the oak tree on the plateau, about how the carving had grown with the tree, about their annual visits, about Theresa's final request that he tell their grandchildren what it all meant. "Love leaves a mark," Daniel said quietly. "Real love, true love, it changes the world in permanent ways. That carving will be there long after I am gone, long after all of us are gone. And anyone who sees it will know that Theresa and Daniel Sterling loved each other enough to mark that love into the very bones of the world." Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That is the most beautiful thing I have ever heard." "It was the most beautiful thing I ever did," Daniel said. "Loving your grandmother, building a life with her, everything good in my life came from that love." That night, Daniel went to bed early, feeling more tired than usual. He dreamed of Theresa, young and strong, her copper hair shining in the sun. In the dream, they were riding up to the plateau, and she was laughing, telling him to hurry up, that the day was too beautiful to waste. He woke once in the darkness, and for just a moment, he could have sworn he felt Theresa lying beside him, her hand in his. Then he closed his eyes and did not open them again. They buried Daniel next to Theresa on the hill overlooking the ranch, and the whole family gathered to say goodbye. Thomas and Eleanor spoke about their father, about his strength and his kindness, and his unshakable love for their mother. And Marcus, at 15 years old, stood before the assembled crowd and told them about the oak tree, about the carving that his grandfather had made nearly 50 years earlier, about what it represented. "We should protect that tree," he said. "We should make sure it is never cut down, never destroyed. It is part of our family history. It is proof that my grandparents loved each other, that their love was real and lasting and true." The family agreed. Over the following years, as the ranch passed to Thomas, and then to his children, the oak tree on the plateau became a pilgrimage site for the Sterling family. Every generation would make the journey up the mountain, would stand beneath the massive oak and trace the letters of those names. Theresa Lawson, Daniel Sterling, 1878, forever. The carving continued to grow with the tree, becoming enormous, the letters eventually stretching to 4 feet tall, 5 feet, larger than any carving should be. But it remained clear, remained readable, a testament to a love that had indeed proven to be forever. In 1978, on the 100th anniversary of the carving, more than 60 members of the Sterling family gathered on the plateau. They held a ceremony beneath the oak tree, telling the story of Daniel and Theresa to the youngest generation, making sure the memory would be preserved. Someone took a photograph of the carving, and that photograph hung in every Sterling home, a reminder of where they came from, of the love that had founded their family. The ranch itself prospered through the decades, expanding and adapting as the West changed around it. But the Sterling family never forgot their roots, never forgot the cowboy who had ridden into our array with nothing but grief and determination, who had met a red-haired woman at a livery stable and fallen so completely in love that he carved her name into an oak tree on a mountain plateau. And the tree stood, year after year, decade after decade, century after century. The mountains rose around it, ancient and unchanging. The seasons turned, snow giving way to flowers, giving way to golden leaves, giving way to snow again. People were born, grew old, died, but the oak tree remained, its branches reaching toward the sky, its trunk bearing the marks of a love that had changed everything. In that tree, in those carved letters grown large and permanent, Daniel and Theresa Sterling lived on. Not as ghosts or memories, but as a promise kept, a vow fulfilled. They had loved each other with everything they had, and that love had left its mark on the world in a way that nothing, not time, nor weather, nor death itself, could ever erase, forever. Just as Daniel had promised, so long ago, on a September afternoon when the aspens glowed gold, and a young woman cried tears of joy. Forever. And the oak tree stood witness, as it had always stood, as it would continue to stand. A monument to the truth that love, real and true and given freely, lasts beyond any lifetime, carved deep into the very heart of the world.